All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming out. I'm Bob Crimmins. I'm the founder and CEO of Startup Haven. I'll be the host for today's session on growing into the CTO role. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. There's Q&A where you can type in questions off on the right. If you do that, we'll try to get to some questions at the end. Time is short, so we'll do our best. If we see great questions, we'll either follow up afterwards or integrate them into future sessions we'll be doing for CTOs. And I want to remind everybody too why we're here. So Startup Haven, we have 2,300-ish founder investor members. There's virtually no startup topic, challenge, opportunity, whatever, that one of our members hasn't experienced. And so these member briefs are how, at least one of the ways that we try to bring you all together to share that knowledge and experience. Today's topic for me is particularly salient. I was a CTO of my first couple of companies, and I'd never been a CTO before. I was just the software engineer on the team, and it made sense that I'd be the CTO. But there was really no other reason. And I'd never been even in a technology leadership position beyond sort of managing a project. So I had to figure it out, like a lot of you are. And, I think I was fortunate that I had a strong affinity for the business side of the house. And so I feel like I made the transition pretty well, but not without a ton of scars and ridiculously hard lessons along the way. And I was fortunate to have the help of a few other local startup CTOs that I learned a lot from. And since then, and that was over 20 years ago, I've mentored and advised and invested in literally hundreds of startup founders, and that includes a ton of CTOs as well. And I always take a little I pay a little special attention to CTOs because I think they need a certain kind of support that CTOs often don't get, and I try to be that resource. But having been through it myself and seen it so many times, I'm just here to tell you, if you're not connecting with other startup CTOs, then you're just not doing it right. And I encourage everybody to think about reaching out to their network and building relationships with other CTOs to learn from. And honestly, every CTO can teach another CTO something, can help with some problem. So don't just go after the big successful CTOs. Find your peers and connect with them as well. So I'm going to bring on our guests. Let me bring them to the stage. But I am really excited to have these guys here with us today. Two fantastic CTOs that I've known for quite some time. And I'll start with Arean. So Arean van Veelen is the founding CTO, was the founding CTO of OfferUp. Fantastic company. What a great product. I love everything. I use it all the time. My family uses it all the time. You guys really put a dent in the world with that. So thank you, Arean, for joining us. And then also Scott Porad, who, has it been 20 years? No, it hasn't been 20 years, 15 years. It's been a long time. Scott was one of those CTOs that I used to connect with when I needed help. And we got together from time to time and just shared challenges and tried to help each other out. I'm really grateful, Scott, for all you've done for me. And Scott is currently the CTO of Dolly and formerly the CTO of Rover and Cheeseburger Network, which if you're not from Seattle, that might sound harebrained. It was a little harebrained, actually, but it was quite a big deal in its time, and had some other technology leadership roles as well. So I thought I'd start today with you guys sharing, call it your origin story. Like when you first became a CTO, what were you doing? Like why did you become a CTO? What was that transition like? And give us just a little bit of background. And maybe Scott, since we were just talking to you, why don't you start, share your entree into the CTO world?
Happy to do so. Thanks for having me here, Bob. And if I could actually ask a question, we can't see on our side the faces of all the people here, so I'd love it if everybody who's attending, just in the chat, just, drop your name and maybe a sentence about your startup and like, how big your team is or something like that. So we can sort of get a sense of knowing who we're talking to.
Great idea.
And let's see here. Okay, so my name is Scott Porad. Like Bob said, I'm the CTO at Dolly.com, which is a gig economy marketplace for moving services. And my origin story, well, that's a great question. Basically, right out of college, I started working at early stage venture-backed startups. I didn't really even know what it was. This was, I'm just going to reveal my age a little bit. This was sort of in the mid 90s when the internet, pre-first .com boom. And I saw this thing called the World Wide Web, and that was cool. And I got a job at one, not even really knowing what was happening. And so I worked as a programmer for a couple of companies. And then I ended up at this company called drugstore.com, which was sort of a first .com boom darling back in the late 90s. And I worked as an engineer. I worked as a manager. I actually spent a significant amount of time as a product manager. I spent about 3 years working as a product manager. And I also spent about a year working in technical operations, like, network operations, that kind of thing. And so all that was like good training for meeting a guy who had this crazy little website called Cheeseburger that was about cats. And I got invited to become the quote unquote CTO of that company, which was the CTO of 1.5 contract engineers. And then it was sort of off from there. Cheeseburger grew very rapidly in a 3-year period. We grew to 100 people. And then I left there after 5 years and went to Rover, where we grew an engineering team from 5 people to about 150. And I was there for almost 8 years. And then quick stop in healthcare. Turned out I didn't enjoy working in healthcare very much, and back into the gig economy. And so I guess that the point I would like to highlight is what kind of prepared me for the role, I would say, was 2 things. The first is I actually have a undergraduate education in business, not in computer science, and computers always, and that kind of thing always came naturally to me. But having that background of just, knowing some accounting, knowing basics of a business was very useful. And then the other thing, and that's something that even, CTOs who are, got a more traditional education can go and get some of that education. And then the other piece was, the tour I took of both doing as an engineer, as an engineering manager, as a product manager was tremendously valuable, and doing something in operations. So I sort of did a little bit of everything. So when I sort of got into the spot of needing to be responsible for everything, I had some context and some perspective.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you for that, Scott. And I'll just say, I just learned another thing from you. We'll probably never do another one of these sessions where I don't start by saying, hey, everybody, put your name and your company and something about what you guys are working on in the chat to get that conversation started. So thanks for that nudge. All right, Arean, so please share your story.
Yeah, let's start. I go a little back. Probably can still tell by my accent, although I've been here now 25 years. I grew up in Holland, and there I've always been interested in tech. I go back kind of to the 80s and 90s, similar to Scott, maybe a few year difference, I think. And I remember touching the first computer in elementary school. There was one of these things where the government said, we need computers, so here's one computer. And I was sitting in the closet. I discovered it one day and I asked if I could play with it. And I learned to code and programmed a few things for the first graders. And funny enough there, I think the first thing I noticed is that I like more about talking to them and figure out what they want than it was specifically the coding. It was like building something, and coding was the means of getting there, right? Then did a mix of tech and business in education. There was a program in Holland called Boundary Spanners, which mixed half tech, so half computer science and half business, which really set up, I think, the rest of my life. And moved to the US to study a bit more. Well, that's what I told everyone. I just want to go to the US. I took an opportunity to through a education program, did that, got a job here, the big company, where although I started in technical consulting, I quickly gravitated to like solution architect. Again, that mix of what's the problem, and I know lots of tech. Let's figure out if we can, use this technology to build something that can solve a real problem. And from there, joined a former colleague who started a startup, done a couple of these first employee kind of startups, kind of asked to join when the founders just got to the point, and always in a role of partly engineering, building things, the technical part. But besides actual, let's say, software engineering coding, it was systems, databases, as well as, whether you do customer support. If you build a product, you're the first one to answer the questions of the first customer. So all these roles come together, got me to grow more into product management as well. And before starting OfferUp, I was at another company called Connect. There, I was officially coming in again with a product tech role, labeled CTO, grew a team. That was the first time I actually had to grow a real engineering team. It was an interesting experience as well. That company didn't make it. Again, it's maybe not a thing for founders. There's a lot of things happening. It's very common that they don't make it. But what I learned from that was, like, after so many times being at a startup and putting everything in there and always working directly with founders, I decided the next one I want to be a founder, because I learned a few things along the way, and that founders did that I could influence. What I would have done differently, I thought, as a founder. So I came with that attitude of, like, I want to start something, and started to work with Nick, who I met at Connect, and we started OfferUp. In that case, got labeled the CTO and did a variety of things. We'll probably get more into details later. But I think the summary is, to reiterate Scott, it was a mix of technology and business. It's always about building product versus just coding an algorithm or coding something on behalf of someone else. You build, as a founder, as a CTO founder, you build product.
Good. Yeah, exactly. Well, so that's the pattern that I think I've seen over doing this for 20 plus years, is that, and first of all, thank you guys. You guys have interesting and varied backgrounds, but there's this commonality that you had some element of business in your brain that allowed you to transition from being more on the technical side to being more on the business side. And that's the thing that I think a lot of early founders who come to the CTO role don't always understand up front. And so I want to talk for a minute about some of the different kind of, the personalities and experiences that often come to the role, because you guys had some standing in business and understanding of finance and accounting and product and so forth. So often, though, it's a coder, like just someone who's a great coder and they can build a product, or it could just be the least weak of technical founders, right? It's not just that you're necessarily the best software engineer and you know it and you love it and that's what you want to do. So we come from lots of different perspectives, and that changes that journey for that person. And I know you guys have both worked with other CTOs, and I'm just curious if you could share some observations about some of the other personalities or background experiences that you've seen, and if you've noticed anything about how those founders grew into that role or didn't grow into that role. Any observations about the kinds of folks who often are labeled and then sort of set with that role of CTO?
I'll bite on that first. That's all right.
Yeah.
I sort of think of engineering leaders have 4 qualities that are in balance. Some are stronger than others. There's technical leadership, there's people leadership, there's project management, and there's product management, right? So technical leadership is like the quality of what we're actually building, right? People leadership is leading people, developing talent, hiring people, all those kinds of things. Project management is just shepherding projects to completion, like getting stuff shipped and out the door, right? And then product management is, are we building the right thing? Are we doing what the customer, building what the customer wants? And I think what I've observed is, at least in engineering leaders that haven't been tremendously successful, is a lot of strength in the first area, a lot of focus on building sort of the perfect thing and using the perfect technology, and not enough focus on the product management piece of, what do we actually need to build. I sort of think of it as like we spent so much time climbing up the ladder, we neglected to realize it was leaning against the wrong tree. And that's one of the traits I've seen. Whereas you can come and look at, and the characteristic I see is it takes a long time for teams to get stuff shipped, because they're spending a lot of time building really fantastic or beautiful technology that isn't serving the needs of the business, which I think is actually, I would say, is a huge compromise you have to start to make in the CTO position of not always building the best software. I don't know if anybody on this call or you guys play much golf. I know I've played some golf with you, Bob, but like sometimes your best shot in golf is to hit it in the sand trap, right? Because it's the least risky thing to do. And that's not an ideal golf shot to hit it in the sand trap. So like sometimes your best play when you're leading a team is to not build the best technology for the business, at least in the near term. And you have to have discipline to be in leadership to guide yourself out of that place you get yourself to, whether it's hitting it out of the sand trap or whatever short-term hacky technology you built. So there's a compromise that comes with that as well.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. Arean, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I agree totally with Scott on the different, almost like say dimensions of the CTO, right? But when we ask about like who do you meet, I have to say, been helping around Seattle mostly. I've seen pretty much a lot of people coming in straight from engineering, like business co-founder needs technical co-founder. What happens is they get pushed a lot in tech, right? And they don't, they just get to focus on the engineering part because that's what they're asked to do. So one of the things I usually try to do is reconnect these founders and say, you together, you're building this product together. And as you talk about it together, we don't you stop throwing things over the wall, which helps the CTO see the other parts, the other aspects of it. And it's also important, not just to see it, also helps them pull out of that more technical mindset, optimizing, and never technically releasing the product, right? You need to see the other parts of it. So it's not just that the technical CTO, the technical person getting labeled CTO is doing this by themselves, is there. No, it's sometimes the dynamics between the founders. I said, like, as founders, you're building the business and the related product together. If you start doing that together, if you share more together, that it helps the technical person come a little bit out of the technical domain and see the other parts of it, which helps, especially in understanding like how important it is to get a product out today. And it's not only about how far you code it in and how optimized it is. Sometimes to say, do you really need to code it? Are there things in this feature that we could actually just for now do manually? No one has to know. I was thinking about this first of April joke many years ago. Google had like behind the scenes picture of how Google search engine works, and you saw tables with pigeons stepping on keyboards. And I felt like, think about it for a second. You don't always have to build everything. But if you have this engineering mindset and you come out of a role where product pretty much gave you what needs to be built, you don't break through that. You don't get out of the box and say like, oh, hold on. This feature can be implemented in all these different ways. And it's a bit of tech, a bit of manual stuff, and we can do this. Because early on, you just want to get something out. If you don't have a product, in more startup like this, there's no product, there's no business. And most of them are looking for some funding early on. So the push is always like, oh, we need to have X, Y, and Z. Otherwise, we'll never raise the money. I'm sure we get into it later. But yeah. So technical, mostly very technical. And as Scott said, but also think about the dynamics between the two founders. If you connect on the right level, that's important too. Otherwise, the technical person has a difficulty growing out of just the technical domain.
Yeah. So can
I add something to that, Bob?
Yeah.
A practical thing. I think probably you experienced this, Arean. So if I'm a listener on this call and I'm thinking, okay, that's all nice. What should I do? I can tell you from my experience, the times I've had the most success is when I had very frequent and regular conversations. The CEO and I were having regular conversations, multiple times a week, but usually once a week, very structured. Like, let's sit down and have a time where we talk about, what does the business need to do, and whether it's what milestones we need to hit for our next round of funding or what we need to do to get customers, and then talk about how we want to translate that into product and engineering work. And that's a very much like you were saying, Arean, sort of a mind meld conversation of us getting on the same page, so that I can hear what the CEO is saying. We can have discussions about that, get to the same page on it, and then turn around and go talk to the engineers and say, okay, this is what we need to do. So that's like a very practical thing. I think having that structured cadence with the CEO or the whole leadership team, if there is a leadership team, is really important. Do you agree with that?
The only thing I want to say is, like, when you say turn around to talk to the engineers, if it's early stage, you turn around, there's only a mirror.
Yeah, that's right.
To yourself. It's just you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Well, yeah. So what I'm hearing from this is that, there are some things that make this hard. I mean, I was talking with Arean and Scott before we went live, and it struck me that it's odd at a sort of meta level that you have to grow into a role, right? Don't you just like practice and get better at a thing? Isn't that just what it means to be in a job and a role of responsibility? You practice it and you get better at it. But and that's true, but there's an element of the CTO journey that I think is a little bit different. And partly, I think there's what I'm hearing, there's almost some perverse incentives that happen in the startup world between CTOs and CEOs, and just between the business side of the house and the product side of the house, the engineering side. And that makes it a challenge for an early CTO. And I'm curious, do you guys see any other elements that you would identify as those things that make it hard? Like, if you're an early CTO on your first company and you've got a 8 to 11 year run coming up to figure out, are you guys actually going to get anything out of this? It's going to be a journey. And we're trying to give you a roadmap of kind of what some of those things might look like. Any words of wisdom, warnings about landmines ahead, things to be on the lookout for, ways to spot danger as you navigate this course?
Yeah, I think, like, it depends a little bit on how you come into this role, right? If, again, we assume here that you're a technical co-founder, you got in this role coming from another role, but you never filled shoes of a CTO. So you come in with small feet into very big shoes. So there's obviously something to fill, and I think that's why it's important to say fill it, because it's a very, said like earlier, the role evolves a lot more around different domains. It's you're more of a a Swiss Army knife. You can do a lot of little things. That's what you needed early on, and that keeps probably growing for a while. And what you do when the team when you have the opportunities to hire the team, is you're going to fill out these specialties with people that can go a lot deeper, right? So you're more a generalist. If you come in and you're a specialist, because let's say you've been a software engineer for a while, you need to kind of step back to the center, say, okay, great, I can do all this, but now I need to go into the other roles, and I don't know much. But I'm sure you can figure it out if you give some time. You can learn it. The books, the coaches, obviously the other co-founders you can talk, other technical co-founders you can talk to. But I think the biggest thing is you need to be comfortable to step a step back, because it's very easy to stay comfortable in that role. If you get hired, you're the engineer, you need a product out, code it. It's great. You do that for a while, and you keep like this, right? And the rest of the company grows around you. And eventually, you're there like, oh, okay, all I've been doing is coding. Now we have a team and all this stuff. And so you need to figure out, when is it time for me to start learning and growing the other skills? And obviously, they have to be ahead of when you need them. But one of the things where I see people struggle a lot, obviously, one is the big jump to management. If you haven't managed people before, the CTO role, if you stay in the CTO role, you're going to grow a team. You need to figure out how to manage it. Manage a team of 3-4 people is fine. When the bigger money comes in, suddenly the company is like, okay, we have the money, we're going to go from 4 to 40. Are you ready for that? That's a big thing. That's building structure. And that's not a technical problem to solve. It's a people problem. So you get totally into this different. I think that's a very big step for people to do is hiring, recruiting, But once you have all these people, how do you keep it organized? And what Scott mentioned before, you have, there's the people and the project or process part, right, around building product that now suddenly becomes the number one priority on your whiteboard. So being ready for that is hard, because you first ask we need to keep building. We have no time to sleep, right? And at the same time, you need to get ready for the next step. And I think the best way to figure that out is to to find other people, like people here that now are listening. I mean, team up, because you all have different backgrounds and you all maybe even different stages of the company. So figure out what it is that you need next, so you can prepare for that and give yourself some bandwidth to do that.
Yeah, that's great observation and really good advice. And it sort of, for me, it drives home this thing that I think I see in the startup ecosystem, in which startup people in the startup ecosystem don't understand the CTO role either, right? If you're not a CTO, you probably don't understand the CTO role. And if you're a CTO, you're probably not out talking to a bunch of people that are informing you and coaching you and advising you on how to be a better CTO. Your CEO counterpart gets that all day long, right? That's their job, is to go out and talk to people, advisors and mentors and investors and partners and all these folks that they're learning about their role every time they talk to somebody else. But CTOs don't always have that channel very widely open, right? You got shit to code, right? I got time for that. But I like that you close that, Arean, with the encouragement to make time to go find other technical co-founders to connect with. I think that's a really, really important thing to do. So, we've been talking about that the role generally as technology leadership and people management and strategy and business, but I want to just talk about the roadmap from two gals in a garage to unicorn, and along the way, that role, it changes at abrupt moments, and typically around funding. Could be other inflection points, but typically around funding. So as you go from the garage to pre-seed and seed and Series A and B and so forth, new demands are put on the CTO. And you guys have been through that, the full run. And so if you guys could just share a little bit about how that role for you, as the companies that you were CTOing, continued to grow in funding, but funding means team and just more production. So could you share a little bit about how you saw your role change over time and where those abrupt inflection points were that maybe scared you a little bit?
Sure. I'll use Rover as a good example. I went from Series A. I came on, right after a seed round had been raised and before a Series A had been raised, all the way until, I don't know, Series G, a long way off. I left the company shortly before it went public, and the big picture, the big arc, I would say, was two things. Actually, I'll make it three. The first was, by the end, I was almost entirely a people manager. I actually remember a time, shortly before I left, where I actually spent like 20 minutes in a room whiteboarding out a solution with somebody to something, and just feeling like, oh, that was very refreshing. I haven't done that in a long time. Now, it doesn't have to be that way. You can design your team to, as you hire people, design your team to get to do the things that you want to do. So that's the second thing, which is it really becomes entirely about getting the right people in the right roles, right? When you have a team of 100 people, you can't do it all on your own, or even, as Arean was mentioning, when you're just getting up to 4, 5, 7, 10, you can't do it all on your own. So it becomes so much about, what are the roles I need on my team and who are the people that can best fit those? And you can design that to work what works for you. So one arc that evolved was just increasing people management, and increasing the recruiting piece of that and getting the right people in the right roles. Another arc that evolved really by about, sort of Series B. Like the first couple of series, they're just like, is this the right team? Is the idea good? And then they want to see some financial results. What are the unit economics? If you don't know the unit economics of your business, like figure them out now, right? And if that's a concept that's unfamiliar with you, be happy to talk anybody through that, but like that's a key thing that investors are going to be looking at. So the financial, the part, my participation with the financial part of the business just increased a tremendous amount as time went on. Mm-hmm. And then the third one that I've thrown there is information security. Increased tremendously as time went on. At first, you don't have much information to keep secure. You try to do the right things. You got smart engineers who make, responsible choices, hopefully. And then as you get a little bit more mature and as you start to raise more money, like there's actually people who want some verification of what's going on here, that you guys are, that we're doing the right things. And so those are sort of three arcs that happened over time, from first of being very focused on just building, and then with each round, each of those things sort of inched up.
Good. I like the way you described it as an arc. Arean?
Yeah. I think there's the technical and the people part to this. If you start, for me, again, I came from a mixed kind of a role into this, again, more the generalist. Early on, we had an app. I'd never written a mobile app in my life, but if you're curious and you work hard, you find time, you will do these things, right? So that early on, it's great, right? It's like, I have a problem. It's somewhat technical. I can go and Google this. I can solve this in 3 days. I have a solution, and that you're very comfortable in that. But at some point, it gets to the point where more money comes in, more is expected from the company. I mean, revenue is an example, but in general, more customers, more stuff happening. So you need to scale. And engineers, we need to just write the right code so it can scale in the cloud. Well, what code do you write to scale yourself? How are you going to scale yourself? And that goes back to what Scott mentioned, like hiring the right people. I think, like for me, figuring out, okay, who are the next people? Is it just, don't hire your clones of yourself, but as I said earlier, you start with this everything, and you spike a little bit here and there in skills that you have in other cases. So fill these little spikes with the specialists, hire a couple of specialists, but do it in a way, and this is the most important thing, and Scott mentioned this as well, like, you have to kind of think of, where are you going to be? What is it that keeps you motivated? Why did you join in the first place? Well, why did you start in the first place as co-founder? Why did you do this? What do you want to get out of it? And if your answer is, because I ask people this, if your answer is like, I just want to become a billionaire, that is no. Actually, maybe that can happen. That's kind of an outcome based on the other things you do. So what is it what you're going to get out of it? If in 5 years the business is gone and you look back, what did you learn? Write it down. What is it that you want to learn, and have your own kind of roughly your path ready. Because then when you start filling the gaps, when you scale up and the thing gets stressed out, you need to fill these holes. You're going to hire the people that take these roles on, that that it's not really you, right? Either because you don't have the skills, or you just know you don't have the motivation to gain these skills quickly. So you start plugging these holes, and you at the same time push yourself in the right direction. So hiring just a bunch of engineers doesn't solve anything, right? And so, and again, if you product and technology combined, it's a lot more than just engineers. You need to start thinking about product, and you might have to hire roles that you never hired, or maybe you never did in your life. So how are you going to recruit someone? How are you going to interview someone in an intelligent way, and on a job that you've never done yourself? Like, example, a quick thing, I actually brought in a friend of mine who was great at that. I met him a long time ago. I said, can you just help me interview this person? Because I don't know how to interview. I know I need this person, but I don't know how to figure out who's going to be the right one. Again, figure out help. It doesn't have to be in your company. But in general, for me, the learning was, I need to go fill the gaps, so that I think about, as the co-founder again, you root it in everything. You have all the hundreds of these roots in the ground. You start chopping them off, and you need to replace them. So replace them so that you keep growing, in the direction you want. Right. So every funding round comes in, there's like, okay, we go from 10 to 100, well, maybe 50, but know who it is. And honestly, if you're pitching, you should already know who you're going to hire with that money, right? So you already have to go to the thinking process. But for yourself, my own experience here, hire the people that do these things that are important, but at the same time help you lift up, give you more time to go that broader role, because the higher you up, it becomes more people and process, if you want that. If you know you wrote down, I will never want to be a people manager. If you decided that, no big deal. figure out a path and have honest conversations with your co-founder. Well, when we get to 30, 40, I want to have a director of engineering, and I have a small team here because I love to do R&D. And this is a tech company. I'll stick with my small team. That's totally fine too. There are many paths. So the other thing, besides going with the idea where you want to be broad about it. Think about it. There are many paths in a company for you as a technical co-founder to end up in. And if you have roughly that line set up, just fill in the roles around you, right?
Yeah.
And when you hire,
so Arean, I want to touch on or double click on something that you said. If what you love is the R&D stuff, and you just want to have a small team, and you want to do like this really important stuff for the future of the company, and developing, new product, and making product better, and so forth. That's what really juices you. And rustling through 200 resumes to find two candidates that you're going to hire out of 17 interviews, like if that doesn't get you excited, and it probably doesn't get very many people excited, but if that's antithetical to kind of how you see yourself being happy, then you don't necessarily have to have that role. A director of engineering could come in and do that. Are there other alternative roles that you guys have seen technical co-founders evolve into, and not just always have to be that CTO? I mean, at the end of the day, as if your most important title is founder, and that founder is attached to equity, and that equity is how you get your wounds, you lick your wounds at the end, right? It doesn't matter if you're the janitor, right? At the end of the day, if you're doing the best thing to make that company successful, that's the best thing you can do. Being the CTO is not the best thing for you to do necessarily. It's making the company successful. Do you guys have any thoughts on, or have you seen any examples of folks who either figured out that the CTO role wasn't right and went on to do something else, or didn't figure it out, and that had its consequences?
That's a good question. The first thing that came to my mind is Craig from Craigslist, who answers customer service phones, doesn't run the company. I'll give this answer. It's not exactly a direct answer to your question, Bob. Once a year, I did an exercise where I asked myself, what are the 3 parts of my job that I like the least? And then I thought about how can I go hire people to do those things so I don't have to do them. And frequently, it didn't always come true. There are parts of the job I ended up still having to do, but it was a good way of thinking about how do I get myself into a role that I'll be happy with.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a smart sort of coping mechanism, right? If you don't think you're going to thrive, and if you're not thriving, it's not good for the company, right? And you both have talked about charting this course where you do the things that you're good at and you enjoy. Obviously, you're not going to just do things you enjoy, but building the team. It turns out that team is one of the most important, if not the most important things for the success of a startup and for the success of a CTO. And that's one of the things that I think is shocking. The first shock to the system of a CTO when they get some money is, holy crap, I got to build a team. And that is super, super hard. And if you've never done it before, you're going to go get help. And I think that the model of going to get help is a really important one. And can you guys share any experiences you had getting help? Like, where did you guys get help when you were learning the ropes and navigating that journey?
Yeah, actually, different ways. I even talked to an uncle of mine back in Holland who runs his own company. I wish I had tapped more into him, had more connections early on in something like a CTO group. I was aware of startup poker, but that's because my co-founder used to go there.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh no, some member had. I think, yeah, no, that's just for startup CEOs. And I thought, I wish there was something for CTOs, because I wouldn't mind playing some poker and discussing some of my problems and see what other people have solved, right?
Yeah.
So it's, I think early on, figure out, one, are there any startup founders, technical founders you can connect to in your community? The other thing is look at your past job. If you worked for a great manager, call them up. Well, you built a team. I was part of it. I enjoyed it. How do you do that? Because I'm now in this job, in this position, never done it. The other thing is when you are growing as a company, you're not just hiring a team of engineers. Everywhere in the company, there are teams being shaped, right? So other people are involved. So there's, as a company, as a couple of people, just talk about it, how you go about it. Yes, there's differences in hiring engineers, but in general, creating a team, it's very similar. The one learning there is like, you say, I want to create a team. If you just think about like, I need 3 engineers and one, let's say 3 backend, 1 mobile, because that's how we build this out. Now, that's great. It's very tactical. Think about like, okay, what is this team going to look like? What kind of culture I want to create? What kind of processes do I need to keep this team running is as important. So don't forget about these things. It's not just about adding a bunch of people. But yeah, so look inside the company. Over the rounds, you have hired a few people. There might be someone in there who's just done this before. Working with a recruiter, if that happens, it's also a great way. I've done that too, and talked to recruiters, and they can share some experiences as well on ways of hiring, at least the hiring process, maybe not the team building process.
Yeah.
But I got hindsight now. Yes, I picked up a lot of things from people. Talking to technical founders that have been there, that have been, let's say, the 2 funding rounds ahead of you, that have the scars, I think is probably one of the most powerful ones. And easily, because sometimes it's so hard to make these connections, they're not as obvious to you, especially if you've just been building in the basement for 2 years, right? Just do it. Find that. You already do it right now because you're on this, on this call right here. But really connect to people. I think that's the easiest way. Like-minded people having similar problems, have experienced it, can help you or connect you to their coaches or people that have helped them.
Yeah, good point. Scott?
Absolutely. I considered it part of the job. And so let me tell you some just practical things that I did. The first was our investors. Like I talked to our investors and I asked them about the other CTOs in their portfolio, and I asked to meet them. Right. So I'd look at their portfolios and say, hey, so-and-so, can you introduce me to so-and-so? Right. I'd like to talk to them. And then practically speaking, and then furthermore, I'd go with a specific question, like, hey, this is the problem I'm having. Can you help me with this? Right. And whatever the problem was, it didn't really matter. Well, can you give me some advice on this? And that's a useful approach because everyone likes to be flattered and ask for their advice. And of course, if I got good advice from people, I learned the CTOs that I wanted to keep relationship with. And if I got lousy advice, it's the opposite. So that was one very practical way. Second very practical way, a little bit harder with the pandemic. Probably for a 10-year stretch, I went to a meetup once a week. I mean, different meetups. I was going to kind of everything. I went to the things I liked because, I put myself in scenarios that I enjoyed. I mean, I remember, so I went to a lot of different meetups, and I'd volunteer to speak at them, to give a little talk. They're always kind of looking for a speaker. I'd had a couple of talks that I would give around town, and I'd ask, hey, I want to do that. Being a speaker attracts people. You're like the honey, and it brings the flies to you, to use an expression. And so that was a good way to meet people. But I spent a lot of time. I mean, I spent, it probably wasn't every week. It was probably 2 to 3 weeks a month. One night a week, I'd be going out, sometimes more. And then probably once a week trying to have, coffee or lunch with another CTO. And again, just either reaching out through investors or through people who I'd met at meetups, following up with them, or conferences. I invested time and money to go to conferences. That's definitely worthwhile. The value of conferences is not the talks; it's the hallway, and it's where you meet the other people. Forces you to be social. It's hard. You got to kind of get out and talk to people. You got a bunch of CTOs standing around all waiting for someone else to start the conversation. So it's actually pretty easy. Just be that guy that starts the conversation. Very emotionally challenging, but it's kind of how you do it. So all those were ways that I sort of just built up relationships with folks, and ultimately just make friends, right? I mean, where you find people who you have interests beyond work. Mentioned I've been golfing with Bob, or you go whatever, and so, but those were the techniques, right? I mean, meetups, talking at meetups, mining my investors, going to conferences, talking to people. Those are the kind of things. And unfortunately, I think with the pandemic, probably there's a few less meetups and a few less conferences than there were. And probably people are reticent to get together in person as well. But so it's probably a little bit harder hill to climb. But those were the techniques I used. And I probably did that for 7 to 10 years. I mean, it's like, it wasn't overnight, right? It just takes time, and you just chip away at it. And I considered it part of my job. And it was just, of the hours I spent each week, that was just part of it.
Yeah, good. So we're winding up here now. We've got about 8 minutes left, and Scott, I know you've got a hard stop, so I want to make sure we get all the juice out of you that we can. So for new CTOs, first-time CTOs, this has been. I hope that this has been really helpful, and I'll just make the observation that neither of you ever said like part of being a successful CTO is like finding the newest, greatest, JavaScript framework, or figuring out how to do load balancing for AWS, or like that technical stuff. Ironically, isn't very important to your success as a CTO. It's being able to build a great team and going and getting help. I mean, that's the two things that I think you guys have said the most. If you were to distill it down, find help.
That's true, but I want to inject one thing. If you don't do these things you just mentioned, well, your success of CTO will get
it's like table stakes.
Yeah,
it's like
success in phase 0 is get the technical shit right enough, right? But your long-term success and the success of the company is a little different. So thinking about the making a startup successful, beyond just the things that we've talked about, are there other, pardon me, sort of think about them as soft skills, or are there other sort of non-job related, like not job description related things that you found that were helpful for you as a CTO in your organization to be successful and to help make the organization more successful? Besides just, I built a great team and I manage a great team. Any other things that sort of go outside the boundaries of your team that you found to be helpful in making yourself successful and the company successful?
Well, can I dodge that question for a second and come back to the previous comment about technology?
Please.
It's table stakes, and you still are a technical leader, and you do have to have a point of view. And I actually evolved to develop a very specific point of view, which I'll share with everybody here now. It's all about leverage. What I mean, what is leverage, right? It's getting more work done with less effort, is what it is. And especially in the early stages, right? If it's just you, or it's just you and 2 other people, and you're trying to go as fast as you can, choosing technology and tools which make it easier to get more done with less effort is critical, even if sometimes it isn't the perfect technology for what you're trying to accomplish. And one of the ways I've employed that is of the 4 most recent startups I've been in, 2 were, hey, engineers get to choose any technology they want, best tool for the job. And 2 were, no, we're going to have some constraints, right? And we're only, I'll give you the example of Rover. Like, we did everything in Python except for our mobile apps. In our web app, we had some JavaScript in it, but it was like, even when Python wasn't the best tool for the job, because it was interchangeable, everyone knew Python frontwards and backwards. Like, it allowed us to go fast. We didn't have a situation where, I'll give a concrete example from a previous company, where it was a do whatever you want. Somebody wrote this template compiler thing in Lisp, and like, he was the only person that knew anything about Lisp other than I was using Emacs at the time, so I knew a little Lisp from like configuring the configuration file. But it was like, anytime we wanted to change that thing, it's like, where's Stefan? We need Stefan to work on this thing because he's the only person who knows this. So one very clear point of view I've developed is actually in the early stages, constrain the technologies to help you get more leverage. But it's really all about leverage. And the cloud platforms, this is a really tough thing in the early stages. You're trying to conserve cash so much, and the cloud platforms are expensive, right? But they give you a ton of leverage, right? They let you get a bunch of stuff for a lot, not much effort, but for money. And thinking about those trade-offs is important. And I think as an industry, we've learned that about some of our operational things, like people build stuff on AWS and they use RDS and all these kinds of things for their databases. Nobody's self-hosting anymore, but even going deeper into that can be tough because it's money, which is real. But it gets you to the first round or the next round, whatever it is, faster because your engineers can actually do things to move the business ahead. So to me, like, leverage is the name of the game from a technology point of view, and thinking about how do we want to employ technology that allows our engineers to do things more rapidly, and also how do we want to design our systems so that engineers can do things more rapidly.
So Scott, if I could interject, so what I hear from you though is not that, so what I think you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is as the CTO, you might not be making that decision, but what you want is a leadership team that is reporting to you that has that mindset, and you're enforcing that, but the folks are going to go decide some of these things. You as the CTO, are you the one who's going to say, we're going to use Python, that's my decision, we're using Python? Or is it just, no, we're going to standardize and we need to figure out like what we should standardize on?
It depends on what phase you come in, right? If you're the first person or the first of a few,
yeah,
like, yeah, it's about values and culture. Hey, do we all agree that this is the kind of team we want to build? And if you get those things understood and then you hire people who have that mindset, it takes care of itself, right? Mm-hmm. If you interview someone and they're a person who really believes, pick the best tool for the job no matter what, and you've already tried to establish a culture of, hey, stick with Python even if it's not the best tool for the job, that's not going to go very well. You're going to experience a lot of friction. Now you're in the people management space, you're dealing with conflict, and that's not what you want to be spending time on, right? So I think at the early stages, yeah, you're deciding that or coming to a consensus or agreement on that with your first set of early engineers you're working with or with yourself, and you're building that culture, and then you're becoming the guardrails to reinforce it and maintain it.
Yeah, good.
So it depends on your phase where you're at.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. All right, so Scott, you've got about 2 minutes before you've got to run off. So I'm just going to wrap up here so that we're not, waving to you from the cheap seat. So thank you guys both for coming out and sharing your experience and insights. Super, super valuable. So now, everyone, we're gonna switch gears, and I'm gonna come out. I don't know, Arean, do you have time to come out and chat with folks for a minute?
Yeah, I do.
Good. So we'll pop out to the tables, and we'll meet you guys out there in just a couple minutes. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Arean. Tremendous. As an example, I learned a ton today. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope I was helpful.
All right. We'll see you.
Welcome. Yeah.